Hi, welcome to Birthing at Home, a podcast. I'm Elsie, your host. I'm a homebirth mum of 2 little boys, I'm a mental health nurse, a homebirth advocate broadly, but also more specifically in the state of Victoria, and I'm an ex-student midwife. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people who are the traditional custodians of the land I'm recording on in Melbourne, Australia. I would also like to acknowledge that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have been birthing at home on country for tens of thousands of years prior to the British invasion and acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded. This is another partner episode, but it's not just any partner episode, it's one from Wilmar. Born and raised in Guatemala, then moved to the United States in 2002, where he met his now wife, who he supported to have 4 home births. This was such a great episode to record, and I found it extremely thought-provoking. I'm so grateful for Wilmar for reaching out to chat about birth culture in America, Australia, and Guatemala, and about the beauty of home birth. I hope you enjoy it too. Welcome, Wilmar, to Birthing at Home, a podcast.
Well, thank you for having me.
Of course. To everyone that's listening, you may have heard in that very brief, thank you for having me, that Wilmar is not from Australia, not an Australian accent. Wilmar, do you want to tell the listeners about who you are, where you're from? Because this is a kind of special episode. I'm really excited for this.
Well, I am too, because it's a topic I ended up learning about your podcast through a conversation in a group of podcasters, and I just casually asked, what's your podcast about? I asked that question 50 times, and I'm like, okay, cool. But when you said what this was about, I got so excited, but I needed to be careful to not overwhelm you. Like, can I talk to you? Can I talk to you?
Yeah.
I am Guatemalan. I was born in Guatemala in the year 1975, so I'm currently 48 years old. I moved to Texas in the year 2002. At the time, I thought I'd be coming here to work for 6 months or maybe a year. It was very unplanned. But one thing led to another, and I've been living here for now 21 years, since 2002. I still visited Guatemala about 35 times in those 20 years, so I still stay in touch. Guatemala, where I come from, is in the same time zone, and a direct flight is 3 hours away from Dallas, where I'm at.
Yeah.
So it's pretty close. I tell people, if you take a plane from Dallas to New York and I take a plane from Dallas to my city, I'll beat you by 10 minutes.
Yeah.
But despite being that much close geographically, it's a huge difference in many aspects. Not only the language, but the culture, which is a culture that comes from having been conquered by the Spaniards.
Yeah.
Here in Texas, you have also some influence of the Spaniards, but around 200 years ago, the Spaniards abandoned. And I'm a teacher by profession and love work cultures, so I don't want to go too much into it, but we connected on the topic of home birth. I met and married my wife in the year 2007. It was not my first marriage, but in the previous marriages, I did not have children. I was more focused on career. And when we met, we were both in our early 30s. I believe I was 31. Or 32 already. I don't remember exactly.
Yeah.
So the conversation about having children was very important.
Yeah.
Whether one way or the other. Having been married before and being 32, I had begun thinking I would not have kids at all.
Yeah, wow.
I was still wanting so much for me, for my career, that I even said to her on the first couple of dates, I think I might not even want children. Who knows if I even can, because I've been married about 6 years and didn't have.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, she said that was extremely important for her. So I said, well, okay. Now, here's, it's not that I did not want them for the sake of not having. I moved from Guatemala to Texas for economic reasons only. I had a very good job there that allowed me to be very happy professionally, but it ended. So when I moved to Texas out of economic considerations, and being from Latin America, the economy always weighs heavy in your mind.
Yeah.
I have about 30 cousins, and I'd say about 25 or 26 of them only have 2 kids.
Yeah.
Because the economy does not allow them to raise more.
Yeah, to have more, yeah.
Correct. So for me, I needed to be well settled financially before considering kids. Now, for my then fiance, I don't think I even proposed before we settled that topic.
Yeah.
I didn't even propose yet. the conversation about having children was very important because for her she wanted a family. If for some natural reason we could not have one, that was okay. But it was not going to be a decision that, I'm going to marry a guy who wants to focus on his career.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, more like a way of saying whatever.
Yeah.
I was still thinking I still need to achieve. We didn't own a home. I had never owned a home in Guatemala. In 6 years here, I had not owned a home. I did not even want to purchase a home because my dream was to return to live in Guatemala.
Yeah. In Guatemala, do most people own their homes or?
Yes, a lot of people do, but I think about this a lot. People usually owned one home in their lifetime.
Wow.
Their parents held them probably if they are of some means, or people usually save for the home before they get married. If they get married before buying the home, that feels like you're doing it wrong. When I married my wife, who is American, we've been married 16 years. I've been married twice before, but both women were from Latin America, different countries.
Yeah.
Our mindset was very common with them because we came from the same socioeconomic structure. It was important to buy a fridge, to buy a stove, to buy the TV before you get married, because once you get married, you have to either pay the rent or the house. You don't have time to save. Yeah. People live with their parents. It's very common to live with your parents until you graduate college, until you are 30. That has to do with the size of the countries. Countries are smaller. They only have one big city.
Yeah.
And I'm always thinking that we're talking about birth, but this is relevant because actually the other aspect is that because we have one big city in those countries, the capital city, and usually the second largest city is like a third or a fifth of the size. Yeah. Most of the health services are only provided first in the major city where you have access to public hospitals, and then in the other cities you have some access, but it's always somewhat poor. I mean, there's a reason they call them third world countries and underdeveloped. So a lot of people see that the biggest problems our countries face is what we call demographic explosion, too many births. Yeah. Too many people having too many children and not having the means to support them. So when you're raised going to college in middle class, you're always thinking children are somewhat desirable, but be careful. Yeah. Because too many can be a curse for them and for you. Yeah. And then you are also set on the fact that the best thing that you can do is plan for everything, including planning for the births. And you think of a hospital birth as the only option. I was born through C-section, and up until the time I was 30 years old, I'm the firstborn of 3 children that my mom had. I was 100% sure that every time that a woman had a C-section, every single child after had to be a C-section, because that's what my mother told me that they told her.
Yeah, wow. That's so interesting. So she is obviously also a Guatemalan mother, and in Guatemala I learnt last night that the home birth rate in Guatemala is about 50%. And it's so interesting talking about home birth from another culture, from kind of 2 different countries, the United States and Guatemala in more Central America, because in Australia, the home birth rate, and I mean, they don't really distinguish between free birth and home birth in the statistics, but basically birthing at home is about 1% in all of Australia. And what's funny is that we are considered an economically quite privileged country, and Guatemala, not so much, but the home birth rate is so much higher. And I guess, it comes back to the fact that healthcare is a privilege, and not everywhere in the world has healthcare like, for example, you might in the United States or in Australia. Obviously in Australia, we're quite privileged to have the Medicare system. So every single citizen of Australia, and even if you're a permanent resident, you can get some sort of Medicare, which is public healthcare. So you can quite easily go and have your baby in hospital for free.
Yeah,
Most
it's so
women do.
interesting that this happens to me a lot. Even speaking the same language, there's things that are different. You say the term Medicare, and here in the United States, Medicare is a government-funded health option for seniors, for people over 65. So
Yeah,
Medicare is
yeah. It's funny
Well,
that they use a similar name.
yeah, what you say about birth rates in Guatemala, it's a consequence of several factors. The economy is one, but the economy, to me, I love that. I have a master's in education because I'm a teacher, but I also took a master's in intercultural studies just because I'm fascinated about, why are countries in such different shape? Now, to me, the question goes back at least 500 years in the case of Guatemala, when the Spaniards came, in the case of the United States, about 300, and in case of Australia, at least a few centuries as well. But one of the things that happened is when we were colonized by the Spaniards that brought forth the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church up to this day has very clear dogmatic lines. I was raised Catholic and I still have a lot of respect for the Catholic tradition, but they have very clear dogmatic lines about birth control. Mm-hmm. So people that are wanting to climb economically in Guatemala, they know that they need to make decisions about that because the economy, even if you're an engineer married to a lawyer or a doctor married to another professional, you know that salaries will never allow you to buy a nice house and buy cars and send 4 kids to school.
Yeah.
Now that I said school, something came up very interesting that happened to me about 10 years ago. Actually, it must have been less. It was probably 7 years ago because I already had 4 children. I went to a gathering of cousins that I had not seen in about 10 years. And they are professionals. They have actually had their professional degree for 15 years more than I have. I had to leave my country because of losing a job and not being able to get another one of the things.
And that's as a teacher?
No, when I left, I was more involved in communications. I can work here at a small office of a family. I became a teacher after the birth of my second child. Yeah. To spend more time at home with my kids. But at that dinner, every cousin is talking about their kids, and most have two children. And they look at me and say, how in the world you have 4? I was like, it's lovely, it's beautiful. How do you pay for school? Yeah. And it hit me. Elsie, I don't pay for school in the United States. Yeah. They have access to a very good education. You can criticize public education a lot, and that's okay. But the topic is they can access a free public education. In my country, there's free public education, but it's horrible. You don't even have desks. You have rooftops that leak. You don't have a floor. You have rodents on the floor. You don't have windows. You can easily find that information on YouTube. And that is extreme poverty. Yeah. I have never met a single person that went to a public school in my country because the priority of a family after having children is paying for their education. And at the time, 10 years ago, the people with 2 kids, 40% of their income was being used in their kids, about 20% for each kid. Yeah. So let's say if a person make a number that is approximate to Guatemalan reality, $2,000 a month in salary, which is a very good salary. They were paying $200 a month per kid per month for them to go to school. How can they afford 4 kids? Yeah. Yeah. So that shapes a lot even of the mentality of having kids. So people, as soon as they begin accessing education and have a desire to climb economically, they think of having at most 2 kids. And the ideal mindset is 1 boy, 1 girl, which is another, a very traditional idea that comes from our values. Yeah. And on the other hand, you have a lot of people that don't have access to health services, that live in poor areas, that end up being 25 and already have 6 children. Yeah. And those children don't have access to education. So I've known people who are 60 and are great-grandmothers.
Well, actually, that's one of the things that I learned last night, researching a little bit on Guatemala as well, is that, so there's roughly, I think it was from a couple of years ago, but the home birth statistic is about 50%. But there's also an extremely high maternal mortality rate in Guatemala.
Yes.
It's quite easy to say, oh, that's because of home birth. But actually, it is the answer or the explanation is a lot more complex than that. In Guatemala, I guess, influenced by all of those things that you've just said, there are also high rates of young girls becoming pregnant, and
Yes.
the complexities with, I guess, being developed enough to, make a baby.
Or nutrition and not access to health. They got it. Listen, I am not familiar with the statistics you mentioned because I am just a father who.
Yeah.
I'm a teacher, but I am not examining statistics in Guatemala. But one thing I learned about statistics is we sometimes erroneously have this misconception of correlation, meaning causality.
Yeah.
A lot of the women who give birth in their homes in Guatemala will probably die either at childbirth or before age 30. That's true. That's a correlation that is because of poverty. They don't die at childbirth because of the home birth.
Home birth,
They could have died because of a bicycle accident and they're bleeding and their nearest hospital is 2 hours away. And they're in a mountain when they don't have access to clean water. And I'm not exaggerating. I've seen this because my job in Guatemala was to go to every little municipality for about 6 years. So I've seen horrible things. The first time I learned about home birth, my mother was a social worker and she would tell me how she would drive a car for 7 hours for 200 miles. I mean, at 30 miles per hour because there's so many mountains.
Yeah.
So 7 hours is not like in Australia that you go,
it's flat. Yeah.
it's literally like 200 miles. And then she steps off the car and then she has to ride a horse for like 40 minutes into the mountain. And then she still had to walk an extra hour to get to a small village. Yeah. And she told me that's where women are having birth in their home because there's no option. So up until the age of 31, where I met my current wife, I thought home births were extreme poverty people. Yeah. Home birth is only if you literally, I said, when after the question of do you have children in a different date, the second question that she asked me was, what do you think about home birth? I'm like, it's great if you're living in the mountains and you can survive it.
Yeah.
I mean, because that's what I thought. I mean, home birth, like, who is so desperately poor that they cannot afford to go to a hospital for what's probably the most critical life decision of giving birth? Now, that's a misconception, of course, but everybody that I've known from Guatemala, whether social, middle class, or even more privileged, I think we a lot share the idea that providing good care means providing the best hospital you can. And birth being one of the major situations where it's supposed to be like my dream was to have a lot of money to if I go to a so-so hospital for an accident for the birth of my children, I need to afford the best hospital in the country. Of course, that was just an idea, but it came up with the foregone conclusion that home birth is bad. Home birth is a consequence that you're doing terrible in life. Yeah. Now, my education began to change in the year 2007 when I was dating my wife. And she began explaining to me, I'm like, what? And because I was still not ready to commit to having children, I was like, okay, it sounds interesting. Now, I'm very naturally curious, so I began asking her questions. And every time there was an answer. She was incredibly well informed because she had a close friend of hers who had already 3 daughters. The first one was at a hospital. She did send me a note yesterday. This friend of my wife, who they've known each other for, I believe, about 39 years. Yeah. She had the first birth at a hospital and she was unhappy. So she researched home birth and she had her 2 other daughters with home birth and my wife was present. Wow. With the labor and everything. So, but that was 10 years before I met her. So,
wow. So is that how she learned about home birth then?
Yes.
Yeah, wow.
Well, she didn't learn through hearing about it or through reading about it. She learned because her best friend, and they're still very close, decided to go for home birth, and my wife, being as close as she was, I think at one point she lived with them in the same apartment, but she was present in the laboring process.
Wow.
And I was seeing a video of those births from 25 years ago.
Yeah.
I was not even in Texas when those happened.
Yeah.
and my wife is in a couple of scenes, so she saw it and she witnessed that. I come short of words, because using words like, I think any birth could be called a miracle, but such a majestic experience of life, of humanity, I don't know. I could go on for hours and still fall short of the words.
Yeah.
Because to me, the birth of my children has been the best thing ever, but not merely because of the birth.
Yeah.
It was because they were home births.
Yeah.
Like, this is a phrase that I always think when people talk about, I mean, I have 4 children, which is more than usual for the circle. I mean, probably most people have 3 here in America. In Guatemala, it's 2. I always say, and if we were younger, we would have had more just for the experience of the home birth.
Yeah, I would probably agree. I am obviously quite young, and I have 2 children, but I think I'm done.
How old are you?
You know, I'm only 27.
Oh, you are very young.
Yeah, I'll be 28 in February.
32 when we married, so she must have been 33 when we had her first. And here's the interesting thing about home birth, not to interrupt you, but we had our last one when my wife was 41. So home birth is not, I mean, we were way more concerned, but even a person that goes to the doctor in a hospital will be concerned about a birth about over 40. So
yeah.
Every little stigma or preconception I could have about home birth has been completely erased through my experience. But please tell us more. You're 27 and you had 2 home births? Yeah,
so I would say I'm starting to reflect more about my first home birth experience, which I guess home birth is amazing and midwifery care is amazing, but when you have what some women call like midwives, like more medicalized midwives attending home births, things get a bit blurred. And I think maybe that was my experience. My experience with my first home birth was, I thought it was amazing, but having had my second son in June at home, I'm like, wow, they're very different stories. And if I could like replicate or have a similar experience to what I had in June, I would birth like maybe not 10 more times, but that whole experience, yes, to me, it was painful, sure, because like everybody always latches on to pain and like, you know, I'm not denying that for me personally, it was painful. But
are you talking about physically painful or emotionally painful?
Physically painful. I guess.
Let me ask you one thing.
Yeah.
If your second birth was physically painful, would you not describe the first birth as physically painful at all?
Interestingly, it was painful, but the way that I had been describing was that it was a different kind of pain. I think this is my 25th recording, and in this podcast I've learned so much, and even in the past 6 months listening to other amazing podcasts about home birth and physiological birth and things like that, I'm constantly like, I wish I could do birth again, because like I would try that, to try and, and it's lost wisdom. And I'm just like picking up pieces, because like once upon a time this would have been like known knowledge within, society, but it's all lost, now. But yeah, I would describe that it's the same, that, if I actually don't like being pregnant, I find being pregnant extremely uncomfortable. And obviously that's the 9 or 10 months. So for that reason, I don't think I'll have another baby, but the actual childbirth I would do again.
So let me ask you something.
Yeah.
Especially with what you describe about pregnancy, what is to you, for your own self, as briefly as possible, the goal of pursuing a home birth? Is it to reduce pain?
No, I think it's to feel safe. I'm not sure if I've mentioned so much to you before, but I was a student midwife a few years ago, and I was a student midwife for 3 years, and I think in total I probably saw like between 10 and 15 births, and they were all in the hospital because we weren't allowed to attend home births at that time.
You were not allowed because you were a student.
Because I was a student, and in Australia, midwives, private midwives aren't able to get insurance for the birth part of like pregnancy care, I guess. So they can get insurance for antenatal and they can get insurance for postnatal, and that's why or one of the reasons why it costs so much is because there's this issue with Medicare not covering home birth, like the birth part of it, and insurance, and that it's like very messy. But yeah, it costs like between $6,000 and $10,000.
That's going through my mind, because I can respond that question easily for myself. But if you were to ask me, I mean, I can respond the following question, not the next one, but the one after. If you were to ask me why am I doing this conversation with you, is because I am so passionate about home birth that I would like to share my experience so others can learn how it can become the right choice for them.
Yeah.
I agree that it's not the right choice for everybody, and we ourselves knew that eventually, either because of the law or because of a wise decision, we might have needed to have one of our births at a hospital. We never did. But my desire is to advocate for people to inform themselves and consider home birth without stigma and prejudice.
Yeah.
But one of the things is to determine the why.
Yeah.
Choose a home birth. I know that for myself. Before I had the children, my why was because the woman I want to marry is set on it.
Yeah.
I could tell you, and I'm not joking, I could tell you that if I had said, I will not under any circumstances consider a home birth, she would have said, then I don't want to even go on another date with you.
Yeah.
Which I think is valid, is very important. It's like when you decide what religion are you going to raise your kids in, or what's their primary language going to be. Those are major decisions. And if you don't agree, I believe people have a right to split.
Yeah.
I didn't have a strong opinion. All I wanted was the best possible outcome for my future children. And in my mind, the best possible outcome was great hospitals. Yeah. And because I didn't think I was ready to afford great hospitals, I wasn't ready to even have kids. But when she said, she is incredibly good at communicating. She never forced the idea of having kids. She said, okay, we'll talk later. I want you to remain open because that's important for me. Yeah. With home birth, she was probably a little bit more firm. We had also dated longer. Yeah. But I could see I had no choice. Yeah. For two reasons. Number one, because she was firm. And number two, because I had no information about why hospital birth would be better. Yeah. And that was the first birth. But as soon as I began taking classes with her, which was just a couple of lessons on a weekend, and I just spoke today to the person, I reached out to her to help me clear my memory. Yeah. I believe it was 2 mornings, a Saturday, 2 different Saturdays for 4 hours. Yeah. After that, I was like a soldier going to battle. You're like, oh, I'm so ready for this. I want to do it. And we had some difficulties during the first birth. She labored, if I'm not mistaken, for about 28 hours. Yeah. So it was very hard. She even ended up with some lesion in her bones because of having to readjust her weight so much and so much pressure in different positions. And anyway, so it was not perfect. It was challenging. But the outcome on an emotional level, it was, at the time for us, it was more expensive because the health system, the way it works here, when she was in the middle of her pregnancy, we decided she would no longer work. And we also talked, because we don't have family nearby. At the time, we didn't have family in the city, like a grandpa or an uncle or anybody that could watch a newborn. We decided that as soon as she had the baby, she would not return to work within a few years. Yeah. So So because of that, we did qualify for some government assistance when it comes to health and for birth, because I was the only income earner. There was only one salary for a soon-to-be family of three.
Yeah.
But that service would only cover a hospital birth.
Yeah.
That government insurance did not cover any. So for us, it was every cent we spent on the birth process, including all the visits in advance with the midwife, came out of our pockets. It would have been cheaper to go to the hospital.
Absolutely.
So it was not an economic decision. First, it was because of what she wanted. But once I experienced it myself as a male, as her husband, oh my goodness, Elsie, my mother, who is from Guatemala, who she passed earlier this year. She passed in January, so she's no longer with us. But she had always desired grandkids, and she had hurt a lot when I left the country.
Yeah.
So I had been living out of the country for 6 years. She was there at the birth. And the expectations that people have is they're going to wait for the birth. They're going to wait for 2 hours for the nurse to take the baby to another room. And then they're going to wait maybe till next morning till they can see the baby through a window.
Yeah.
And then 24 hours after the birth, maybe the grandma can come and touch the skin of the baby.
Yeah.
My mother was holding the baby within 10 minutes of birth. My mother cut the umbilical cord. My mother heard all the moaning and groaning of my wife trying to push that baby out for a full day. And my mother heard the first cries of the baby.
Yeah.
I did not have a great relationship with my mom. But that to me was the best gift I could ever give her.
Yeah.
For her and for me, to myself, it was like, oh my goodness, what is this? And there's so many other aspects, Elsie. Being an immigrant, I especially around 2007, I had no friends.
Yeah.
I mean, I had friends that I could see every now and then, but nobody that I would hang out with on a weekly basis. My wife did have lifelong friendships.
Yeah.
So for 3 or 4 years, 3 or 4 days before the birth, we had like 10 people in our house.
Yeah, wow.
Like camping. We had an aunt that flew from her home state of Oregon. I think her mother flew in as well.
Yeah.
Her couple of best friends and her sister who live in town were there. So that was at least 5 adult females. They were there all the time. I was literally hugging her or napping. I didn't even have to cook. And not that I was surrounded by this sense of community.
Yeah.
It felt so, it made me think of a pack of lionesses protecting the lioness that's going to birth. And thankfully, one of those friends, actually the friend who got my wife into learning about homebirths, she's also a very good photographer. She was never a professional photographer, but she was incredibly gifted and still is for taking family pictures. So she took a lot of pictures. Those pictures are still up. She also had a blog, so she would write her thoughts. Another one of the friends was journaling, like at 2 a.m., she began thinking that the birth was going to come. The midwife was sure the dilation was so many centimeters, but 40 minutes later, this changed. So it's a process that I even took video. It was before iPhones and before digital video, so it's on tape somewhere. I have never seen those videos.
Yeah.
But there's not a price for that, Elsie.
Yeah. And I think when I say safe, like the reason for why I chose home birth, it was because, I'd seen all of these things happen in hospital, and I knew that I'd seen like home births in videos and things, but I didn't know anyone personally that had ever had a home birth. I just knew that it must be different. And actually, I will give credit to my husband because he was born at home in the Netherlands, where there's also a high home birth rate compared to other countries. And I remember being in the appointment I knew that I wanted a private midwife. I knew that I wanted that. I wanted the continuity of care. And it was proposed to me, do you want to have a home birth? And previously I had thought, yes, I'll always choose a home birth. But when it was presented to me, I was like, can I actually do it? Like, I've seen how birth can go wrong. I've seen what can happen. Do I believe in myself enough? Do I trust my body enough? And I guess, probably I didn't. I did have the home birth, but probably I felt like I I needed the midwives rather than I needed to trust myself. But it was my husband who was like, well, yeah, let's have a home birth. And I was like, okay, let's have a home birth. But yeah,
let me ask you something. You're saying you felt you needed the midwives. Does that mean that there was an alternative to have a home birth without any midwife assistance?
So there is a rise. I'm not sure how it's documented. I think anecdotally we know that there is a rise in free births in Australia. So, births at home or wherever you want, really, without a medical person.
So I am guessing your audience will know more about Australia, but let me share what I learned, how it was for us in Texas.
Yeah.
The midwife has actually have to be licensed.
Yeah.
She needs to have a partner doctor that in the case of an emergency, and the emergency could come in month 6 of the pregnancy.
Wow. Yeah.
So, the emergency doesn't mean an emergency at birth.
Yeah.
But we meet with her about, if I'm not wrong, 10 times during the pregnancy, like once a month the first 3 months, twice a month the next 3, and in the last 8 weeks, from week 30 onward, I think every week. Yeah. And of course, she comes and stays at our house the last 2 days.
Yeah.
So that was our only option, because I believe practicing a free birth would have precluded us from a few other opportunities. The midwife has to have a backup plan, including a route for an ambulance. If we were to need to call an ambulance the moment of birth, say an umbilical cord is around the neck or the baby's breech. So that was information given to us during the first pregnancy, which made me feel very confident. Not because I trust hospitals a lot. I mean, I'm the person that says, if I'm not bleeding, don't take me there for anything.
Yeah, yeah.
A lot of it had to do with being raised in lower middle class. I didn't have money to go to a hospital for things. But through my learning process, I realized that there's an industry, a health industry, that needs to feed their cycle. They need to bring people to the hospitals. But here's the thing. Hospitals are good. Doctors are great. Yeah. But what's the scenario where they add more value to your life? When your life is at risk because of an accident.
Yeah.
And when your life is at risk because of an accident, you have no choice but to trust a great doctor and go to a great hospital with all the resources. But chances are, if you have an accident, you're nowhere near one.
Yeah.
So your body is incredibly resilient, and this industry is established to save lives, to rescue lives from situation of risk. It could be a long illness too. Yeah. But why do we treat pregnancy as an illness?
Yeah.
Here's the other thing, and these are some things that I learned from the midwife 15 years ago. Which do you think is more contaminated? Your house, where there's 5 people sharing the same viruses every day and breathing and sleeping in the same bed, sharing utensils for eating, or a hospital where there's 100 people who come actually sick with some sickness you've never had? Yeah. Wow. Even the maternity ward, as sterilized and clean as it may be, the traffic and everything. And before COVID, it was much more there. I was like, you're right. A hospital is contaminated. Yeah. Why do we think that handling a baby up to 3 or 4 people within 10 minutes is safer? Why do we wear masks for a father to see their child if for 5,000 years or whatever amount of time you want to believe, people were born without needing to protect from them? Yeah. And another thing that she said was, your baby during pregnancy has been listening to the mother's heartbeat every second of their life. It's the biggest sound they've known. Why does it have to be cut so suddenly at birth? Yeah. And I almost cried when I was told that. I began thinking, I would be the most cruel person if to my babies, I would take them away from their mother, or not me, but hand them off to go to another room, or to, if my wife wanted to hold them with them. I don't recall each of them, but I know at least one of my kids had the umbilical cord at least an hour and a half after the birth, is still attached. Yeah, yeah. And then after all the love and warmth and the emotions and the crying had happened, and we chose who would cut the umbilical cord. You saw a picture of my 4th child. Yeah. He was the 2 older children.
With the cord burning.
Cut the cord together. Yeah. And even though they might not remember as clearly, to see the picture, it means so much for their unity as siblings. Yeah. But what I'm trying to say is there was an amount of arguments that to me made this, I don't want to use the word empowering, but it was like, if life is meant to be at 100% by the fact of who we are as humans, only through a home birth could I, as a man, experience the whole value of my wife's pregnancy, and only through a home birth could she feel in control, having the agency to determine what's best for her and for her child.
Yeah.
With consulting of the midwife, with support of friends, with even a backup plan for a doctor if necessary.
Yeah.
But she was in charge. She would not need to be tied to a bed, to a room, to a floor of a building under a certain schedule. She was in charge of how she wanted to do it. And she would ask questions to the midwife, but my wife would decide.
Yeah.
And so the word empowering seems to justify that, but it's more than that, Elsie.
Yeah.
It's more than that. I call the births of my children the happiest moments of my life. Even happier than the marriage, than the wedding itself.
Yeah.
It's just, I get emotional thinking about that. You know, I've looked back on it, and there were times where I feel sad that we knew my wife was 42 by the time we were holding our fourth baby, and we knew she could not get pregnant again. We also did have 2 losses before baby number 4, so we knew that was going to be our last baby, and I was like, "You're telling me I'm not going to have a birth again at home?"
Yeah, it's like addictive.
It is.
Yeah, I would.
But it's chemically and physiologically addictive.
Yes.
The amount of whatever your body releases of the hormones of well-being. Listen, we are adults.
Yeah.
We're adults. So I'm going to say this. It's better than the best sex you can have. It's different, but the amount of intimacy in the emotions, in your brain, you're obviously surrounded by other people, but all the chemical aspects of the union that can be realizing in sexual intimacy, a birth is so much more intense.
Yeah.
It's I mean, look, the last birth I ever saw of my children was almost 8 years and 9 months ago.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I get so excited talking about it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I would describe the birth of Frankie, who I had in June, as the best day of my entire life. I don't think, I'm certain nothing can top it. Like, I just, and I think I've said this before in other episodes, that if more women and partners and families could have this experience, like, how things in the world might be different. I know that's like a big step, but I just see it as like, it's and I hear this all the time in the stories that are shared on the podcast, that the way it's impacted how a woman feels about themselves as a mom, as a woman, as a parent, how they parent, like it has so many on-flow effects, this amazing experience. And by raising children is tricky. It's like every child is different. And
keep in mind when you said raising children is hard.
Yeah, it's hard. Yeah, I have Murphy is 3.5 at the moment, and it's requiring a lot of emotional regulation for myself. But like, it's just, I would agree with all of the things that people have said before, that it's changed how I feel about myself and my body. I trust my body. I truly believe that, like, my body works. And it was really like full circle the other day. My son Murphy, he had a cut on his finger or something, and he was saying, I have this, and he said, but don't worry, Mum, my body will fix it. And I was just like, yes.
Here's an interesting concept. Let's say that there's two lines of thoughts about this. People believe in either evolution or creation.
Yeah.
If people believe in evolution, our body has evolved and improved each time. Our body right now is at its best way in history because of all that it has learned. So why not let the body take care of the most basic function, which is to continue the life cycle by itself? And if you believe in creation, then the body is the most perfectly created organism, the human body, why don't you let it achieve what it did for thousands of years by itself? I mean, especially if you believe in creation and Western religions, the birth of Christ was on a manger. It was so resisted.
Yeah, and it was a home birth. Yeah, it was a home birth.
Exactly. So the idea that again, I'm not trying to put hospitals down in any way because they serve a purpose. But what I think is that the ideal setting for a birth is where a woman feels safe. I like the word that you use, safe. In control is another way that I see it, mostly because of my mindset at the time. I thought that it was a home birth could be out of control without all the structure that you would assume you have. But here's another thing. To me, is the climax of the human experience.
The climax of the human experience. I love that.
It is the birth, but a home birth where you're relying only on your own natural abilities. And if we had video, people would see me putting my hands around and making all these gestures of how capable the body is.
Yeah.
As a male, I get to witness that. But also I felt I'm not a person, that is mystical in any way, but if there was a mystical religious experience moment, it being a part of that community of friends that my wife had, there was a friend who played the guitar, and for during hours of labor, she'd be playing songs that they liked.
Yeah.
And come on, you cannot have that at a hospital.
No.
I chose some. I am more into rock music, so I chose a couple of songs to play off the iPod.
Yeah.
And I knew what was the first song that my babies would hear. Obviously, they don't remember, and now I find it silly. Yeah. But there's this sense, it's a big party.
Yeah.
It's a celebration of life where you are in your sacred space, which is your home. Our first son was born in our bedroom. It was quite difficult because it was a long labor. So for the second child, my wife decided to have a bathtub, and it was in our living room.
Yeah.
All 4 children were born in the same home, the very first home that my wife and I bought. When we moved, because with 4 kids, we couldn't stay in the same house, where we couldn't sell that house.
Yeah.
We couldn't sell it. We figured out so many ways to keep it. And about a few months ago, we were going to sell it. And guess what? The sale fell through on the day of closing. After 40 days that we had done paperwork to sell it, it fell through. And the first thing I did was take my children back.
Yeah.
Say, listen, the house is all empty, and say, this is where you were born. And here's some pictures.
Yeah.
I cannot imagine another way to communicate to my children how much they were loved, how much they were wanted, how much they were desired and planned for months before their birth.
Yeah.
And I cannot imagine what they feel. I remember knowing, my parents had a very rocky relationship. They divorced by the time I was 12, and I was very happy that they divorced.
Yeah.
But I always felt that my birth had been oppressing to my mother.
Yeah.
She was taken to a hospital. She didn't have a choice. She had a C-section. From then on, the birth of my brother and the birth of my sister were also C-sections, because the first one was C-section. My father, I don't think, was able to be in the room until the next day. I don't even know if he wanted to be, or if my mom was wanting him to be. But I found nothing of joy about my birth.
I would say the same. I know that I was in induction because I had, my mum has told me very briefly, because I was like overdue, but like, what does that mean? That could mean anything. But I don't really know many details of my birth. I don't know if, my parents also divorced when I was 15, and I was happy about it as well. Their relationship was extremely toxic, and I actually, whether my dad was present when I was born, I have no idea. I think there was some disappointment that I've only discovered, later in life, that I was born a girl. So I think just the whole situation was, not very nice. And I'm so happy that I'm able to give my children a different pathway, like you. You sent me that video the other day, and although your kids might not have been like, oh, let's tell my birth story to some random
12 and 14, the girls.
Yeah.
But they already know that home birth is probably a possibility for them. They're not thinking about getting pregnant.
No. But
But they're
The
very aware.
power.
They're so aware of their own birth. My 8-year-old every other month asks, "Can I see the video of my birth?" Because there's a
Wow.
moment where I took a video of 30 seconds before he was pushed out and 30 seconds after, and a lot of joy. I'll share that with you, of course,
Yeah.
because I love to share it. I remember I was studying for a master's degree when he was born, and I had to go to school the next day because, it's a master's degree and you cannot miss a class.
Yeah.
And I said, "How did everything go?" "I cannot tell you, but do you want to watch the video?"
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I don't want
Yeah.
to watch it. What?
Yeah.
But she was in a tub in the living room. But see, when I heard you talk, an idea came to me that I had never thought of. And I look back on my parents a lot. And my dad passed about 20-something years ago. And I don't know the exact year because it was a traumatic experience for me. We were very distant. My mom passed away this January. I never, ever heard my father talk about my birth. And we had a good relationship. Even after the divorce, for a few years, we had a good relationship. It went bad later in the last 5 years of his life. But we hung out so much. I felt I got to know him better than my mother. And I knew I was loved as a son to him and to my mother. But I never had those glimpses of joy. And when I heard you talk about that and about your dad, I was like, what is the first memory that my father had of me? I don't know.
Yeah.
The first memory that my mother has of me was the bad news that she got pregnant at 17.
Yeah.
And then the fact that she got to marry when she was already pregnant with me like 6 months. But the first thing I know about me is that I was born in a C-section that seemed to have been very oppressing. That is the word. Even when I say C-section, there's a little like thorn in my heart that makes me feel sad because my mother always said it with such a sadness. I think she was even giving general anesthesia. I mean, it was 1975.
Yeah.
So she was put to sleep.
Yeah.
And she wakes up and boom, there's a baby.
Yeah. Well, often the women, I've read many stories about, and I mean, I've experienced it as well. Like I was a part of an elective C-section and I thought, oh, it's elective. Like she's chosen this. She wants this. Amazing. She's got her makeup on. She's prepared, blah, 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 blah. It was her second C-section and the C-section ended up, baby came out, but then they were like, oh, but we didn't realize that some things actually happened from the first C-section. And so she was put under and the dad and I had this baby like back up on the maternity ward while the mum hadn't even like met the baby yet. Yeah. It was just the most bizarre experience to be like this mother, like, yeah, it's amazing that the dad could hold the baby and stuff, but like for so many physiological reasons, like that connection with mother and baby, it needs to happen instantly. Of course, there's always like little instances where, something critical emergency happens and maybe that can't happen, but I think it happens far, far too much. Yes. It's definitely much more unlikely in a home birth setting. There's a lot of research now to say that, even if you do need to resuscitate the baby can still be connected. It doesn't, you don't have to take the baby over to the corner of the room and it's work around it. You can work around it.
See, now that you mentioned some of those things, I remember that I was told some of those things. I mean, the classes we took was before the first birth, so that was around the year 2008, 15 years ago. More than 15. My son is 15 and 2 months. Yeah. So it was probably 15 and a half. And I've never again heard it. And I know that a part of me was like, okay, I don't want to hear that part. I don't want to think about those possibilities. But I had this reassurance that I knew that the midwife was thinking about it. I knew that the midwife would be on top of that. So that allowed me to be much more confident. I knew that I didn't, just like at a hospital, I don't need to do anything. You trust them. But I learned that to a point. She was a birth expert. My wife also had some midwife studies. She wasn't trying to be a midwife, but more of a doula. I don't know if you have that definition in Australia. Yeah. So she also knew some, but to me, more than anything, it was like, okay, I don't need to know how a surgery goes. Yeah. You can talk to me for 20 minutes. All I need to know is, are you good at it? Yeah. Are you confident that you can handle it well? Yeah. The same thing with the midwife. She did explain a lot, and there were many things that I'm sure raised her, but others were like, okay, I don't know and I don't care. As long as you know and you can do it when it comes to it. So we never had any major issues. But to me, I like to go back to the question that I posed, because I would love for anybody to examine why. And the why is, to me, again, is very clear to respond. I think that's what I've been talking about the last 20 minutes, is not just to avoid a hospital, is not to prevent something that wouldn't be great. It's really to go for it, to go for, you took note of it, and I think it's I like the phrase too, to go for the climax of the human experience, to go for, if you like hiking, why are you going to stop at the middle of the hill instead of going all the way to the top? You know? And we could make another adult analogies, but the important thing is, why don't you go for what it could be at its best, what the body of the female human body can do at its best, which is birth. I mean, you women have been birthing children for thousands of years.
Literally thousands of years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, it has worked well. I just thought of it as well. Whether you think of creation or evolution, in both ways, the body is currently, the human body has its maximum potential. It's either evolved to its best or was created at its best.
Yeah.
Why do you need to put so many stop signs in between? But the reason to me has to be for somebody to go for a home birth, to examine what is their why. Financial considerations are important, of course. Yeah. We knew that going for home birth would be more expensive.
Yeah.
But we dove into it, we thought of it, and it's like, and we knew that going for a hospital birth could be cheap. When I had a job when we were pregnant and had the first and second births, I lost that job, which was a very good job in a corporation, and I was in the upper management level. I lost the job when my wife was 5 months pregnant with her third child.
Yeah.
And I was literally unemployed for about 8 months. Thankfully, we were able to qualify for financial assistance, and that's how I became a teacher. That's how I pursued a new degree. But at that point, me without a job, we even talked about it. We even said, should we consider not pursuing? We had already hired the midwife.
Yeah.
We had already started the process. We had already started the payments. We discussed, should we not have ourselves a home birth because we just cannot afford it? And our conclusion was, even if we borrow the money, we'll be able to pay it back within a year or two. We will never get back what we lose.
Yeah.
A home birth.
Yeah.
And not only us as adults, now I see it with my daughter. I mean, each of them has a lot of pictures to look at.
Yeah.
Imagine if one of them did not have a home birth because we couldn't afford it.
Yeah.
I mean, I am privileged that I'm in Texas, in the United States. I did have access to what they call food stamps. I did have access to unemployment insurance. In my country, those do not exist.
Yeah.
But if I have a privilege, if I have this opportunity, why don't I make the most of it? And you talk about privilege at the beginning, how there's a privilege in the health system. But if we have the privilege of having a human body, women as having this privilege of birthing and having a body that can withstand all the process and then offer the most wonderful first few seconds of life to their baby by the physical touch, by the contact, by letting the baby listen to the heartbeat, by keeping it warm in the arms of the mother, in her breast, in her bosom, not necessarily just with an electric blanket, not be taken away. Why don't we exercise that privilege? And we as men, if we have the privilege, I mean, my wife thankfully never complained about the physical pain too much, but if we have the privilege to be distant from that pain, where we have the privilege to be attentive, be servants of the woman at that moment, and be there just fully focused, and the ability to be there with our children, to hold them, to watch them, to take pictures, to enjoy the moment, why don't we take advantage of that privilege? And I think that's what home birth gives us. Yeah. A privilege of a lifetime. I mean, it sounds so rhetoric and repetitive, but it is of a lifetime. Yeah. It is wonderful. It's the climax of human experience. I'm saying it for the second time, but I like that. And that's why I love talking about this, Elsie, because it's like if you ask anybody, hey, what's the best football game or cricket game in Australia, or the best concert you've gone to, they'll tell you all about it. The best party you've gone to. How was your first dance in high school, your first kiss? People would love to talk about it. I can talk to you for hours and hours about the joy of the birth of my children because I was there every moment.
Yeah.
And I was there only because of home birth. The
Yeah.
circumstances would not have been allowing it in a different setting.
Yeah. What is in Texas, what is the thoughts around home birth?
Oh, great question. Listen, when my wife talked to me about it, I was influenced by my own background in Guatemala, in Latin America. I was influenced by the fact that I thought it's only for people who live in the mountains.
Yeah.
But then I asked her, and it was also what's the word? It's like a French concept. A lot of people that she knew kind of knew because they knew them as friends for a long time. They knew my wife and her best friend who had educated her about that for a long time on the topic. But a lot of other people were like, I remember at work when I began telling people, they were like, what? Your wife's going to have the baby at home? Or I remember when we said that we were pregnant and we would begin talking about the birth of our children, and the first question is like, okay, or what hospital is it going to be at?
Yeah.
And I'm like, no hospital is going to be at.
Yeah, exactly.
And so it is still, it's not like ridiculed because midwives are, I mean, it's a large state, and I believe it has about 35 million people as a state of the U.S., but it's still an outlier. People, I don't think, other than friends that she already knew at the time of her home births, I met other people. When I talked to, I met other people, whether males or females, that experience home birth for their own kids.
Yeah.
And I thought the best answer I get is like, oh yeah, I know of a friend who did it.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
So it's not common practice. Now, here's one interesting thing. When we had our second child, I believe that 48 hours after the birth, she did cough for 2 seconds. It was more like a hiccup.
Okay.
But because she was just, a tiny little baby, she lost 1 or 2 moments of breath. Like, we breathe in, out, in, out. In that hiccup, she lost 2. So for 3 seconds, her face went purple.
Yeah, okay.
It was nothing, Elsie. It was a hiccup. She lost her breath for 3 seconds. It's a baby, turned purple, gone. But my wife was worried. It was only her second baby. We called the midwife. Since the midwife did not see it, she could only go from what she heard from my wife. She said, listen, it doesn't seem like a major thing, but it's better to be safe. So I recommend you take her to the hospital, describe what happened, and they might check her lungs to see if there can be an infection. Anything. And immediately she refers to a hospital. Nobody's trying to be enemies with the hospital. But as soon as we arrive, after the whole intake information, the nurse said, okay, how old is the baby? 2 days? Where was she born? Because, a baby that's 2 days is usually still at the hospital. I said, she was born at home. Oh. And when the doctor arrived, we went to the emergency service. When the doctor arrived to take the information, I could even see kind of like whispering in her ear, like in high school when they gossip on one another. And my wife and I could both tell that doctor was already, before meeting us, frustrated with us. Because she immediately began patronizingly saying things like, well, you're already taking a few risks and we're going to check. I hope everything is okay, but you already put the baby in danger and stuff like that simply because of our decision. So we were not trying to make enemies with them, but the enemy. Now, I am not going to say that's the case for everybody. That was our experience. That was that one specific doctor, but that's the only doctor that I've seen in the first month of life of any of my 4 children. So I came out with this impression that she was rude, she was mean, and I caught her lying. For example, she kept talking to us about all the risks that could have been associated with the home birth. And one of the things that they wanted to do, I remember this moment so clearly because, it was a tiny baby, 2 days old.
Yeah.
They needed to do a spinal tap. Do you know what a spinal tap is?
Yeah.
I didn't know. I knew that was the name of a rock mockumentary movie. Well, when I heard the phrase, we need to do a spinal tap, I was like, what?
How's that going to help?
We want to do a midnight oil or an AC/DC. Anyway, so she said that there were a lot of things that they, as doctors, could only do in the hospital because of all the considerations about cleaning and knowing how to do. And she calls on a nurse to request assistance for doing the spinal tap. Then she hands the responsibility to the nurse to perform my daughter's spine, a 2-day-old baby, on the spine with a syringe. And I hear this nurse tell another nurse, "Can you help me? I've never done one of these." And I'm like, what in the world? And a few minutes ago, you were telling me that you are the best, safest place for doing all of this? And then I believe the baby needed to, she wasn't wearing a diaper or was, I don't remember, but there was some remnants of feces in her lower back. And the way they were cleaning, and I could tell that there could be a risk of contamination between the fecal matter. I mean, it's a baby, so it's just a tiny little bit. And the area in the spine where they're about to put the syringe, I'm like, this one seems worse. But mostly, the two things that stood out was how she talked to us. The doctor was mean to us. And then when that nurse said to the other, "Can you help me? I've never done one of these."
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure a spinal tap is something you don't do on every person. I don't know. I've never even cared to research more.
Yeah.
But the fact that we were talked down, and then, so that's to respond to your question on how is it perceived. I believe, I don't want to go too radical on this, but my perception is they see it as a practice that hurts their business.
Yeah, well, you said that you listened to Lloyd's episode, and yeah, I mean, he was saying the same thing. I think we all have this, or most of us in, that have home births and whatnot, we understand this very well, because, yeah, maybe it feels uncomfortable to understand that reality, but it is a reality, that it is a business. And as I'm pretty sure it was Lloyd that said, like, it's marketing. It's very bad marketing if you say, like, another woman has died. You only have, in Australia, you pretty much only hear about women dying if in childbirth, if it's associated with a home birth. Then every news outlet has it. And it doesn't happen that often, so of course it's like built up, but it's never reported in a hospital.
You see it on the news in Australia where a woman dies in home birth?
Yeah. Or like some, you hear about midwives losing their registration because it's quite strict, and in Australia, it's very, very much run by obstetricians. Mm-hmm. And in Australia, we have a governing body called, well, it's abbreviated to APRA. And APRA is responsible for registering midwives, and you have to adhere to the strictness of APRA, and you can be reported by anyone. I could have that experience in an emergency department like you had, and I could figure out a way to report it to APRA, and then APRA is meant to investigate the practice of that healthcare person. But like private midwives, I listened to an episode of another podcast a couple of weeks ago, and they were saying that the stats or whatever about private midwives, who are the ones that are supporting women having home births, if you are a private midwife, expect that at least one time in your career you will be reported. And reported could mean you lose your registration, and with that you are not allowed to practice. Unless, I realize obviously this episode is about you and your
listen,
experiences.
Like we said from the start, I would say it's using my story to advocate for this, because to me as a man, as a father of children born at home, as a husband of a woman who had that in her mind, I went from what is this I was not against it, I was just uninformed, to being incredibly passionate about. I cannot have children anymore. My wife cannot have children anymore. We're more close to our 50s than our 40s. So it will not happen for me, but I would love it if my daughters do.
Yeah.
I love it if my sons, with my sons, I mean, this is another concept of culture and gender roles. I believe that they have less of a deciding power on that.
Yeah.
But to me, once again, why would you, having the opportunity to experience the best moments in a lifetime, choose to diminish them through going a different route?
Yeah.
So my goal is not to tell you all the intricacies of my personal story. My goal is to share how wonderful home birth has been to enrich my life. You said at one point when you stopped there and said raising children is, I was thinking hard. You're gonna say beautiful, but I'm thinking it's hard. I have 3 teenagers now, and it is hard. But when you think of how it all started with that beautiful moment of birth, it's just so wonderful. It's an anchor. It's an emotional anchor.
Yeah, an
for them.
anchor.
It's an emotional anchor for me as to understand. Like I told you, I just realized I never heard my father talk about my birth because
Yeah.
he wasn't there, and my mom talked about it with sadness.
Yeah.
And yeah, I hear the word C-section and I feel sad because I think my poor mother was forced into it. I mean,
Yeah.
she wasn't necessarily forced. So these are consequences of not having the information and not using the information to exercise, to make the most out of our lives. And those are the most joyful moments of my life, those births.
Yeah.
The birth is not just the second of comes out, and by the way, in our case, the first 3 babies, we didn't even want to know the gender because
Yeah,
what
wow.
mattered was as long as it's healthy. I mean, before I met my wife, I remember I thinking, as soon as we get pregnant, we're gonna find out the gender. We're gonna paint a room the color of the norms, and all
Yeah.
that. It all changed. So, as a man, I think one of the most important things is to keep an open mind, because there's so much that I could read and study and examine, but there's no way I can know as much about it as a woman. There's
Yeah.
even as a father who was there for 4 home births, there's not as much as I can share about what it means than having birthed them myself. And that's never
Yeah.
happened. That never happened. So to be open-minded and be supportive and allow yourself to be led, because many times I was, like I told you, there's when people talk about what I was doing, I was eating and taking naps most of the time.
Yeah.
I was not doing much, but I was there.
Yeah.
So it's not about my story, it's about how to use that story to empower others with what to me would be the best thing they could consider for their lives, for their journeys.
Yeah.
People are considering having children, if they're an age of bearing children, do the research. But that is a very personal decision as well, because again, examine your why. If your why is because it's going to be more convenient, you are probably going to be disappointed. There were times that it was hard.
Yeah.
It's not cheaper. In our case, it wasn't cheaper. And there's a lot of things. But then examine your why. And my response to that is because I want the best opportunity to have the most wonderful experience in life.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that is my why. I mean, I'm repeating myself, but that's the one word I can...
Yeah.
Examine your why and consider it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's like a perfect way, I guess, to end the episode because, yeah, I really love what you said about like the climax of life, you know, and yeah, if you're going hiking, climb to the top, don't stop halfway.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
Well,
thank you so much. Is it like 6 p.m. there?
right now it is. What time it is for you?
11 a.m. on the morning after. Yeah, it's on Saturday, and for you it's Friday. So that's, yeah.
Okay.
So
listen, I know we said we're going to close, and I know we talk about maybe doing a second part, but in case we don't, allow me just a minute to read this text that I got from
Yes.
the friend of my wife. She said,
yeah, please.
I basically asked her, hey, how do you learn about home birth? Give me 1 or 2 phrases. She didn't give me one or two phrases. So I had just had my first baby in the hospital. I didn't even know home birth was an option. My experience was disappointing. I had not wanted the epidural, but they told me I had to because I was hyperventilating, which meant my baby might not be getting enough oxygen. Then, after I had the epidural, I couldn't feel anything and couldn't push effectively, so they had to suction her out. The first try, the suction popped off her head, and then they did it again. They also gave me an episiotomy with no warning and then botched the stitches so that 5 months later I had to have surgery to repair it. Through all of it, the doctor and my nurses were all very condescending towards me. I felt stupid and powerless and completely at their mercy. And she has given me permission to share this, so I'll share the name Collie. That's her oldest daughter, who is 28, I believe, right now. When Collie was 2 weeks old, I was at a church event, and there was a woman there that I did not know well. She also recently had a baby and was admiring my new baby and asked about the scar on her head that was still visible from where they had screwed a heart monitor into her forehead while they were suctioning. I told her what it was and repeated what the hospital had told me, that it didn't hurt her even though it had left a scar. The woman looked slightly horrified and very gently said, "How do they know it didn't hurt her?" That was the first time I began to question everything. I went to her a few weeks later and started asking questions about how she had her babies, and that was when I learned about a gentler, more natural way to birth, with a midwife helping me in the comfort of my own home. It was life-changing for me. She had 2 more babies. That's how my wife learned about it. That's how we had 4 babies at home.
I get like chills because so many things. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, and thank you. Make sure you thank her for allowing that to be shared.
You go ahead and thank her. She asked me to give her the link of the episode. Her name is Leslie, so give her a thank you.
Thank you so much, Leslie, for sharing a little snippet of your story. But such an impact, like a small snippet, but so impactful. And I'm so glad that you were able to find that better way for you that, you know, probably was very healing to know that it doesn't have to be like that. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.